Alright everybody, The Legend of Zelda games tier list. Starting off is of course the original The Legend of Zelda. This game is okay. I thought it was actually not the worst experience ever. I was really excited to see where everything came from, all the ideas, the Triforce, Link, Zelda, Ganon, and that's really where the game shined, just seeing all the stuff and where it came from. Now with that being said, the game itself, it's not that good. This game is just confusing, man. I never knew where to go. There's barely any dialogue. They just give you a sword and say, hey, go wherever you want. And that's kind of fun for the first 20 minutes until you have no idea where you're going and you're lost for an hour. The difficulty is also crazy. I mean, there's not much to say. It's an NES game. It's to be expected, but it did get annoying dying constantly or coming into dungeons with a million enemies just spammed across the room. So yeah, it's not the best game. Honestly, in comparison to the other Zelda games, it's probably the one I like the least, so gotta go with the D tier. Next up is The Legend of Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. Now this game has a lot of similar problems to the first game. It's definitely confusing. It's actually harder. It's very difficult. Frustratingly difficult, but I will say I feel like there are a few things in Zelda 2 that I can actually admire that I didn't really in the first game. I really like the way this game looks. I really like the soundtrack. I think the boss fights are really fun. So sure, it has some problems that the first game has, and it's still not a perfect game on its own, but I do think I liked it a lot more than the first game. So with that, it's still going in the D tier, but above the first game at least. Next up is where Zelda got real, A Link to the Past. This is the first Zelda game that you could really call exceptional. The music is so beautiful. The game looks unbelievably good, even for its time. I mean, SNES games are known for looking great even today, but this game was something else, man. I really like the graphics on this one. This is the game that really introduced everything. Everyone thinks that Ocarina of Time and Zelda 1 introduced the most stuff, but I would say it was really this game. This game introduced the real story of the Triforce, the Master Sword, the dungeon layout that we see in every game today, or well, saw until Breath of the Wild, and even most of the music that you would think originated in games like Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask or something later down the line actually originated in A Link to the Past. Even as a game on its own, ignoring the impact, it's very fun. I enjoyed exploring this world. I enjoyed most of the dungeons and the boss fights. There's really nothing to say about this game that's negative. I guess it is a little bit confusing, but even then, compared to most SNES games, it's way ahead. So yeah, you gotta put this game in the A tier. I mean, it's close to the S tier, because I do love the game, but I think there are a few better ones. We'll get to those later. Next up is Link's Awakening. Everybody says that Zelda 2 is the black sheep of the Zelda series, but I don't know. Link's Awakening is pretty bizarre. All of these Mario enemies running around, the disconnected story, the weird, wacky music. It doesn't really feel like a Zelda game half the time, at least it didn't to me. But with that being said, the game's still kinda awesome. The dungeons and the boss fights are really well designed. The story is pretty touching. I mean, I don't think it's as good as a lot of other people do, but for Zelda standards, the story is very good. And if there's any criticism to give this game, I guess it would be that it's a lot more confusing than A Link to the Past, but I don't know. I don't think that's really a big complaint. Like A Link to the Past, there aren't as many things to criticize as most games in the series, so although I don't think it's as good as A Link to the Past, it's not as influential. Even on its own, it's not quite as fun. I'm still putting this in the A tier. Next up is Ocarina of Time, and what is there to really say? S tier? Best Zelda game? The end. Next up is Majora's Mask. This is a fan favorite for a lot of people, and I see why. The story is so dark and intimidating, completely different to the rest of this series. They really tried to experiment with this one, and that's definitely where the game is at its best, the story. The music is also incredible. Everybody knows that Ocarina of Time had a perfect soundtrack, and this game took some of those songs, added a few new ones which are arguably better, and put them in amazing places. In my opinion, Majora's Mask has the best soundtrack and possibly the best story in the entire Zelda series. Now the gameplay is a little bit of a different story. I simply didn't enjoy the main quest of Majora's Mask. I thought stuff like the Zora's Egg quest and the Bottom of the Well or Econo Well, whatever you want to call it, quests like that really messed the game up for me. I feel like the pacing was kinda weird. 4 mini dungeons and 4 big dungeons. That's a little strange. And you can't blame the Zelda team for any of that. The game was made in, what, 1 year? So it's pretty impressive what they were able to do in such a short amount of time. But it's not my favorite. It's going in the B tier. Next up is the Minish Cap. This was my first 2D Zelda and my first traditional Zelda in general. I played Breath of the Wild, I then played Tears of the Kingdom 7 years later, and then I played the Minish Cap, so I had a very positive view of this game. I thought it was really special and perfect for the Zelda series. I thought I would never find that many games that I preferred, but coming back to this game after playing some more Zelda games and really looking back, yeah, Minish Cap's not as good as I remember. Don't get me wrong, it is a good game, and whenever somebody says that the game sucks, I have to disagree, but it's not that good either. Ezlo's pretty funny. I like a couple of the dungeons. I think the soundtrack is okay, even though it's ruined by the sound chip of the Game Boy Advance. It's a decent Zelda experience. You could give this to a friend, tell them, hey, it's Zelda, they'd be able to have fun with it, but it's nothing special, so I don't think it's a C tier game. I don't think it's that good though. We'll put it below Majora's Mask in the B tier. Actually, looking at all these other games over here, yeah, never mind. This is going in the C tier. Next up is the Spirit Tracks, which in my opinion, or in my experience, is the most forgettable Zelda game. The characters are funny, the soundtrack is really good, but yeah, this game didn't really get a hold on me. I was never really that motivated to play through it, and most importantly, I can barely remember much of anything that happened throughout the game. This game's also just kind of weird because it feels like a mobile game. The controls are, I guess, as good as they could get for the console, but the graphics and the music and everything having to do with the game, it felt like it was a mobile game. A really good mobile game, but not something up to par with the other Zeldas. There isn't even much I can say about this game because, you know, I don't remember a lot. And because of that, we'll put it in the C tier, below Minish Cap. Next up is The Wind Waker, the complete opposite of Majora's Mask, a game with a very dedicated fan base, but it's super cartoony, it's lighthearted, it's not that deep. It gets kind of deep, but it's not that deep compared to Majora's Mask, and yeah, I feel kind of in the same boat about it. The Wind Waker had a lot of good ideas, it has its own personality, it's one of the most distinct, recognizable Zelda games, especially because of the way it looks, but when it comes to the actual gameplay, it's kind of just okay for me. The dungeons in particular are pretty underwhelming. The first one is Dragon Roost Cavern, which is okay, but not very recognizable, barely has any music. The next one is the Forbidden Woods, which, does anybody remember anything that happened in this dungeon? Then there's the Tower of the Gods. This one's recognizable. Then you had the one good dungeon in the game, the Earth Temple, and the two after that were once again pretty underwhelming. The dungeons in the Wind Waker really felt like a step back from Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, which is not something I want to say. I actually really wanted to love the Wind Waker and its dungeons coming into it, but I just couldn't. The story didn't really interest me that much either, so yeah, I don't think this game was actually that exceptional. At least to me, it wasn't that special. Although I will say, I think it's better than Majora's Mask. I definitely enjoyed it a lot more, and so we'll put it right above Majora's Mask in the B tier. The next game up here is Twilight Princess. This game reminds me of Ocarina of Time a lot, and I'm not saying that it's a copy or anything. I think that argument makes no sense. What I'm saying is that this game reminds me of a lot of the reasons I love Ocarina of Time so much. The long, brilliant dungeons, the cool boss fights, the engaging story, all of that is there in Twilight Princess. The graphics do look a little bit weird. To me, the HD version in particular looks too orange. There's something very off about it, and everybody at this point can admit that on the visual side of things, at least, the Wind Waker does age much better. But in terms of gameplay, Twilight Princess is phenomenal. People really sell this game short. Yeah, it has a few boring sections, like when you're having to collect the Tears of Light, but the dungeons in this game are incredible. Arguably the best dungeons in the entire Zelda series. Arbiter's Grounds, Lake Bed Temple, the Twilight Realm dungeon, Snow Peak Ruins, just these 4 dungeons are incredible, and the rest of the game, yeah, the dungeons aren't quite as good, but they're definitely up there. I see why some people say Twilight Princess tried to be too edgy, cause it does look edgy, it's very dark. In terms of visuals, it's the darkest Zelda game ever, but I don't know, I feel like this game accomplished what it was setting out to do. I don't think the developers really wanted to make this game that much, but considering that, they made a masterpiece. This is the next game that I'm putting in the S tier. Great game. Next up is The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. A lot of people hate this game, and I get why. You know, the motion controls can be frustrating, there's some padding at the end, everybody knows that, but I kinda love Skyward Sword. Not kind of, I do. I really love Skyward Sword. I think most of the problems in Skyward Sword are in the other Zelda games, like padding, for example. Yeah, Skyward Sword has padding, but the Wind Waker had the Triforce Hunt, and Majora's Mask had a few things, and Twilight Princess had the Tears of Light sections, so I don't think it's really a fair argument to say Skyward Sword is the worst because of padding. And on the good side of things, Skyward Sword also has some of the best dungeons in the series, some of the best characters, one of the best soundtracks. This game is really good in a lot of ways. Also, the art style. This is a more personal thing, but in my opinion, this is the best art style in the entire Zelda series. If anything, I feel like Breath of the Wild looks kinda similar, just toned down a bit, and this is one of my favorite looking games out there, not just for a Zelda game, but in general. I don't think Skyward Sword is the best Zelda game because it sticks very close to the formula, and Ocarina of Time already perfected what you could possibly do with that formula, but I'm putting it in the S tier above Twilight Princess. Say what you want, I love the game, okay? Getting close to the end here is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and man, when this game came out in 2017, it was something special. People say that, they're not lying when they say that. Exploring this vast open world, which is 8 times bigger than the world of Skyrim, seeing all these different characters and enemies, the way they behave, there was clearly a lot of love put into this game, which you don't see all the time. The soundtrack may be underwhelming compared to most Zelda games, but it fits the game itself perfectly. Listening to those pianos in the background, yeah, it wouldn't fit most games, and especially most Zelda games, but it does fit Breath of the Wild. This game was an obvious response to people hating Skyward Sword so much, so they just got rid of everything traditional about the series, and I will say, that came with a lot of good, like the increased freedom and the big open world, but it also came with a lot of bad. There are a lot of things in the old Zelda games that I wish were kind of in Breath of the Wild. Dungeons are the biggest example. These dungeons used to be the focus of the Zelda series. It was a dungeon crawler second, and then an RPG adventure game first. Breath of the Wild felt like the dungeon crawler element was just completely gone. The Divine Beasts are kind of dungeons, but they don't really feel like them. Even on their own, the Divine Beasts are just not very fun. On a first playthrough, they're fine, but I've tried coming back to them, and it's some of the least fun I've had with the entire series, honestly. The story is not that good in this game, the music's a little underwhelming, the dungeons are pretty bad, but because of that exploration that we will never forget, it's going at the top of A tier. Last but not least, The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, the long-awaited sequel to Breath of the Wild, which a lot of people don't seem to like anymore. I wasn't actually that excited for this game when it came out. I know, crazy considering I played all the Zelda games now, but back then, I liked Breath of the Wild. I thought it was really good, but I kinda just got Tears of the Kingdom on a whim, thought I would try it out, and I did truthfully end up loving the game, even more so than I loved Breath of the Wild. I thought the world was so big and fun to explore. It was really interesting seeing how the world had changed from the world of Breath of the Wild, and more importantly, it was just really fun seeing the 2 new layers. I know they're underwhelming, I know they kinda suck, but seeing them for the first time and exploring both of them for the first 10 hours or so, it's pretty fun. The story is not good, we all know this. The graphics are kind of outdated at this point. The soundtrack, better than Breath of the Wild, I'll say that, but it is a little bit worse than a lot of the games in the series. The dungeons in Tears of the Kingdom are pretty okay. They're not bad like they were in Breath of the Wild, so that's better. They're just okay. Yeah, I kinda wish the dungeons in Tears of the Kingdom were better than they were. They were better than they were in Breath of the Wild, at least to me, but there was like 1 or 2 maybe that I liked, being the Wind Temple and the Lightning Temple. The rest were just slogs to go through, especially on a replay. And speaking of replay, going through Tears of the Kingdom on a second playthrough is not very fun. You've explored everything there is to explore, seen what there is to see, fought all the enemies, gotten all the weapons, and what sucks about Tears of the Kingdom is that there's nothing beyond that. Once you've played the game once, you never want to go back. If this was just the first playthrough or the ending tier list, it would be basically at the very top, but that's not what this tier list is. You gotta consider every factor, and because of that, the game being so unreplayable and the dungeons being so disappointing, I'm gonna put the game at the top of the A tier. I do think it's better than Breath of the Wild, but I don't think it's quite as good as Ocarina of Time, Skyward Sword, or even potentially Twilight Princess. And there it is, there's the Zelda games tier list. I know it's not every Zelda game, there are 4 that I haven't played in their entirety, so I'll get to those eventually, maybe come back to making this on a stream or something, but yeah, that was pretty fun. What I'm really excited for now is waiting for Echoes of Wisdom to come out, because then that game will show up on this tier list, and I can put it in the F tier.